How many times has someone told you that immortality is actually a curse if you really think about it? At this point, you probably even believe that. There are some really good arguments for that position, but they are nowhere near as universally applicable as you might think. Today, I want to try and convince you that immortality could actually be pretty cool, just like our ancestors used to think, before we learned about the finite limits of human processing power and the heat death of the universe. First, we've got to actually establish what I mean by immortality. Because our ancient ancestors, they knew many of the downsides of immortality. The punishments of Sisyphus, Tantalus, Prometheus, basically any of the us's, gives us a sense of just how bad eternal torture can be. While Gilgamesh's quest for immortality ends with the stark reminder that it is the finiteness of human existence that gives it its value. The age-old lesson. The ancients also knew of the tricksy loopholes that surround discussions of immortality. The story of Eos and Tithonus sees the latter, a mortal wished into eternal life by the former, a goddess. Unfortunately, Tithonus is not granted eternal youth alongside his eternal life. A slow torture of eternal aging ensues, with Tithonus eventually begging for death and being turned into a cicada, so that he could scream about his predicament in a high-pitched voice that no one needs to listen to forever. Clearly, what I mean when I'm discussing immortality is not any sort of explicitly cursed or punitive eternal life measures. Those are just curses. What we're looking for then is immortality with a reasonable expectation of consistency in both mind and body. Not necessarily eternal youth, but a lack of obvious degeneration in any sense, and of course the inability to die. There is a dividing line between the ancients and our modern senses when it comes to the topic of immortality. And most of this is a post-enlightenment acceptance of the vastness of existence and the smallness of our place within it. Extrapolating out to infinity, well, an immortal is expected to be trapped under rubble for an infinite amount of time. If we'd go shorter than infinity, it still might be thousands of years in terms of their life, as just things collapse on them and they can't move. If we assume our universe, they're going to spend millions of years floating in the void of space, maybe even billions. See the death of every civilization and every person that they encounter, and be the last entity with any energy left when the heat death of the universe eventually comes. All the while, the human mind incapable of storing even its own personal history on that larger scale. There simply aren't enough synapses. With a modern understanding of the natural world, immortality seems on an infinite, or at least cosmic scale, to be horrific. But here's the thing. The limits of the human mind, the inevitability of cold, dead space, floating for billions of years, and the statistical certainty of accidentally stumbling into millennia of actual or sort of naturally inflicted torture and being trapped and pain, these would all be the realities facing an immortal in our world. But unless you're in the hardest, Earth-like science fiction, none of that needs to be true. Human memory limitations could be bypassed through external memory drives or uploaded consciousness. New material or technological advances could see civilizations thrive for vast amounts of time with truly renewable energy sources. Or the technological capacity to hop to different worlds or different realities where things haven't run out yet. And other superpowers, tech, genetic modification, or cloning and consciousness transfer may render many of the threats that immortality faces through a hard look at science moot. More than that, that's without touching faith. The gods, active or otherwise, may move to grant immortality, or change or remake the world in new ways to accommodate their chosen immortals. And therefore the gods potentially have the power to stop that treadmill of apathy and boredom. My point is, unless you're actively stoking the ire of the gods, and immortality is bestowed upon you as a form of torture, most worlds, most versions of reality, are so positioned that immortality is not just a curse, as long as you're not exactly in our world, as perceived by empirical scientific fact. When stated like that, I hope it feels fairly obvious. In a world in which there is no room for magic, the supernatural, or the divine, immortality is a cruel and unusual fate, partly because it breaks all of those understandings of how the world works. In any other world, immortality can be fairly nice. And that is my problem with immortality's presentation in media. The people who are making media, the creatives, they live in our world, and they're trying to capture audiences who live in our world. So their big statements about life, death, and existence, they necessarily borrow from our world's philosophy, popular culture, and material reality. Even when the worlds that they're being put into, the worlds they're depicting, contain gods, magic, superhumans, and all sorts of other things which defy our understanding of physics and reality. To demonstrate my point, I want you to think, really think, about the last piece of media you consumed that doesn't portray immortality, or even longevity, as a greatly tortured path. From Twilight to Doctor Who, Watchmen to Invincible, immortals across the board are proven callous to human or mortal concerns. They're lonely, they're isolated, and they tend to believe that their immortality is a curse. Even in worlds which contain other immortals, time travel, or while they wield reality warping powers. The immortal pity party, for me, radiates similar energy to Christian nationalists who are baffled at the notion of non-religious morality. Just because you don't believe there's nobody noble enough to continue to care about being good to regular people when there's no outward pressure, it doesn't mean they don't exist. The fact that you're going to lose everyone you love does not necessarily make a monster of a man. And even immortals in our world, with all of the disadvantages and none of the supernatural advantages, may still see it as a big part of their honour and duty as humans to help and support humanity, rather than moping that everyone they know will die, which, by the way, is also true of every person. Everyone we know will die. We just might not be there to see it. In fantasy specifically, this insistence on immortality being seen as a curse feels to me even more out of place. Earlier, I outlined a couple of sets of critiques of immortality, differentiating them by the ancient world and the modern world. Fantasy worlds tend to operate anyway slightly outside the bounds of our modern understanding of physics, with violations of thermodynamic laws, the squared cube law, and many more. I think it's fair to say that the heat death of the universe, or a suggestion that the universe is billions of years old, are not necessarily real or important facts in most fantasy settings. The gods are real, man. A lot of the time, it's some great mythic or divine force that is functional in creating a fantasy world. Heck, most established real-world faiths do the same thing. They have creator gods, they have a story of creation, and they have a prophesied day of destruction, judgment, or ascension. If a fantasy world has actually canonically been around for over 1 billion years, that's notable. That's a weird choice. Why do that in fantasy of all places? It's also weird if we know that a fantasy world is going to be around for a few billion more, so that eventually everything will turn into a cosmic soup where nothing ever happens. That's weird too. Why would you put that in your fantasy world? It's a strange creative choice, right? The gods would probably have stepped in to reorder or remake reality a few times, or Maybe the great boar of the night is hunted down by the sun god, slain, and turning all creation into a sun-baked paradise forevermore, a heaven of sorts. In fantasy, unless you're a creator or destroyer god, immortality just isn't infinite in the same way as we might perceive it under our modern understanding of what infinity is. As either the world's going to get unmade, everyone ascends to immortality with you in some great ascension to Asgard or heaven or wherever, or dark forces succeed in imposing an eternity of darkness over everything, only to eventually be saved a couple of generations later, and everything's remade anew as the world and the rules change and the gods are happy and everyone's, eras and epochs in fantasy, between the gods shuffling things around, or between different realities splitting or fracturing or merging. That's not an infinite drudgery of time, because that's not helpful in creating such a world. Even if your immortality renders you immune to those truly existential cataclysms of remaking a universe, even if you survive that, you're then usually going to still have the company of the gods or other immortals to stave off that isolating, dreadful madness. So, fantasy immortality is finite, due to the nature of divine creation and destruction and cycles that tend to be true in fantasy worlds. And fantasy is also populated by vampires, demigods, titans, and deities who are also along for the immortal ride with any other immortals. This is social company, an extended family who might well hate each other, but they're at least peers in this experience of limited eternal life. You can still introduce elements like the decay of the mind, the losing of core memories, and the tragedy of falling in love with a mortal. These are all staples of fantasy and, frankly, any story involving immortality. But if we're being entirely honest, being forced to find a new identity, to reset whoever you are every 100 years so people don't notice you never age, sounds significantly less unpleasant than dying at 70. We've sort of covered all the major criticisms and misgivings around immortality, except boredom. This criticism of being bored of existence, having run out of things to do, it feels quite modern, being given its kind of rooting in the vastness of infinity, the mathematical vastness of infinity, and in the finite nature of experiences. But immortal boredom, apathy, and generally having seen and done everything there is to do, these are features of immortality stories for as long as we've been telling them. As in the Epic of Gilgamesh, death is perceived as giving meaning to life. It means that you can't just get to everything. So the things you do get to do define your character and your legacy. If you can just do everything, it all feels a little pointless. And eventually, you'll have done it all. Be eternally bored for the rest of time. Bollocks to that. It is such a depressing way of looking at existence. Sure, mathematically, if your time and experience is infinite, you will run out of things to do, to experience. Different actions. You will have done every action in every combination an infinite number of times. That's the tragedy of infinity. You're mathematically guaranteed to have even thought every thought that can be thought an infinite amount of times. Even the bad ones. But that's infinity. That's its own problem. It's an impossible thing to properly grasp. And existence is finite. Even immortal existence. Even that hypothesized heat death of the universe. It might be capable of being bypassed entirely through quantum fluctuations, reintroducing some energy to the system, and maybe sparking off a whole new system of creation. But definitionally, if the universe is at maximum entropy, so too is every body in it, including the body of an immortal. If your body is capable of doing work still, moving, thinking, chemically reacting, well then the universe has not experienced heat death. And interesting novel things can happen still using your body as an energy source. And if your body can no longer do work anymore, any sort of chemical or physical work, well then all of its chemical processes have halted, including thinking and respiring, so you are dead. If there is no work that can be done by your body, even if you're immortal, then you have no experience. Time does not pass for you. Physicality does not exist for you. You cannot move, you cannot think, you cannot experience. You are dead. Even while immortal. Those are the two options for what will happen if you put an immortal into our world, for as long as they'll stay here. There's even less room for infinity in fiction, as we've discussed. My suggestion is that despite its name, despite what we think about it, immortality is not infinite. Or at least will not leave you infinitely floating in an infinitely empty void. I mean, in the worst case scenario, where you are the only magical being in existence and somehow magic is able to keep you with full control of your bodily functions while the universe is energyless without you, you still become something of an arc ship for all of existence that finds its way to you. Your body itself is the breeding ground for novelty, newness, and the creation of new life. You are essentially a god, floating in nothingness. Your own body, the beacon of light and heat and energy that the universe lacks. Immortality in every scenario except that one is finite, thus bearable. Because you can say, I've done everything possible, but have you gotten good enough to beat the best chess engine in existence with queen odds? There's a task for you. So there you have it. Any form of immortality that is not intended as torture is non-infinite. And it doesn't turn you necessarily into some callous psychopath unless you're already that way inclined. I mean, you have to be a pretty good person to cope with all of this, but it's not impossible. And I think the way we address the question of immortality in fiction is generally disingenuous to the fact that these settings are not our world. That the mechanical realities of existence just simply aren't the same as they are for us, and that fictional people, newsflash, aren't perfect analogues of the worst instincts of a fallible human author. Yes, it is likely that at some point an immortal will be captured and forced to have a pretty horrible time. But time passes, empires fall, and a strongly built base of friends, allies, civilizations, and reputation will see an immortal freed before the inevitable march of time is going to free them. It is possible to make immortality torturous, horrific, tragic, or cursed, but those require authors and creatives to place their immortals in situations which evoke torture, horror, tragedy, and pain. All of these things that are experienced by regular human people as part of their regular existence as well. It's not novel to live your entire life under immense suffering, under an oppressive regime, or under threat of torture or reality of imprisonment. People can be really tough and get through some really dark stuff. I hope that's not ending things on too sour a note. Feel free to sound off, discuss and disagree with me in the comments. It should be an interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to it, which is a large part of why I make videos like this. So subscribe and do all the nice things if you want to see more of this style. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.